Thank you. Good morning. About 3 years ago at LiliCon in Las Vegas, Nat here said to me and Ray, there's a lot of professors in the room. Should we get them all together and just have a conversation? And so we did. And that was the beginning of what became the Lilienfeld Alliance for the Teaching of Rational Skepticism. One of our conversations in that room that night was, what do we call ourselves? What do you call in your classes? And why did you choose that name instead of this name? And another discussion was, shouldn't we share our resources with one another? And we started sort of collecting syllabi that people in the room were using in their classes. This is a paper that we have written based on an analysis of all of those syllabi. And so I want to tell you a little bit about kind of what we found. This is a manuscript that's out for review currently, so hopefully at some point, it'll be in print. But for now, this is the first presentation of the results of that analysis. As you know, and we heard from Dr. Gusso yesterday, critical thinking has long been considered a goal of formal education at all levels, not just higher ed. Employer surveys reflect that employers really think critical thinking is one of the most important things that they're looking for in recent graduates. In one recent survey of employers, number one was teamwork, number two is critical thinking. This is really what employers are wanting from people they hire. I'm in the CSU system. Craig Foster is in the State University of New York system. The CSU system is the largest four-year university system in the country, in the United States, with, as Ray said yesterday, almost 500,000 students at any point. SUNY is even larger. They include community colleges in that system. Both of these two systems require a critical thinking class as part of general education, and are seen as sort of the trend setters. So critical thinking is in some ways institutionalized in higher ed. As Ray said yesterday, this is really hard to define, and essentially anybody can teach a critical thinking class and call it critical thinking. On our campus, the argument has been made that anything in math automatically meets the critical thinking requirement because math requires you to think. Computer science people are like, same here. Women's studies, same here. Ethnic studies, same here. So everybody's teaching something they call critical thinking, and all of them can make a good case that what they're doing is critical thinking because the definition is so non-existent, basically. So we have made the argument that there is a lot of critical thinking education going on in higher ed, but much of it is ineffective. If you look at the research, it's kind of a big mix. Ray shared these data yesterday, but I think there's some of the same data, but I wanted to show you evidence, that college-educated people, this is from our own study, but there's lots of studies that find the same thing, that college-educated people are no less likely to believe things that are untrue than people who've never been to college. So on this way of measuring critical thinking, we are failing. We are failing at the education in critical thinking. So parsing kind of the literature on what sort of critical thinking education works, it seems pretty obvious to me in my reading of the literature that teaching using a refutational approach is in fact effective. And Kowalski and Taylor, that's the paper to look at if you haven't seen it. But Kowalski and Taylor took certain topics and taught some students that topic using a refutational approach, meaning they said, here's a false belief, let's analyze exactly why this false belief is incorrect. And some students would get the same topic, but they would ignore the false belief that lays underneath it, and they would just teach the truth. And then compared outcomes, learning outcomes. And they make a really good case that refutational approach is simply more effective than just stating what the truth is. Scott Lilienfeld wrote about this, has talked about it quite a lot. He calls the first approach, the non-refutational approach, he says it's the Alka-Seltzer approach. You just think that you put the true information, and the false beliefs will just dissolve because they are clearly wrong in light of the truth. And he says, obviously this doesn't work. There's lots of evidence in many different fields. I've found studies in physics, in biology and chemistry. I've done some of this research in my own discipline of human development and family science, that when students come in with a false belief, and we don't do anything about it, we just say, I'm going to teach you the truth, the false belief persists. And of course, it's been there a lot longer than knowledge. And so after the class, the knowledge is what disappears and the false belief simply persists. So we're really advocating a refutational approach, directly pulling the false beliefs into the classroom, directly and clearly refuting them. Rod just gave us lovely examples of how one might refute specific false beliefs. So we decided, let's look at people who are teaching that way, specifically critical thinking that way. There's work on pre-bunking and kind of debunking, and some people make a big argument that one or the other is better. Right now, there's a lot of argument that pre-bunking is better. From the perspective of being in a classroom, I might have 40 people in my classroom. I really don't know who's heard of this thing before and who hasn't. So effectively, I don't see how I know the difference. For some people it's pre-bunking, and for some people it would be debunking. So I think of it all the same. It's all refutation. It's all refutation. Yes, in the paper that Ray and I published that he mentioned yesterday, we found that there is an effect in terms of reducing misbelief. There is an effect of reducing beliefs, even the ones that were not discussed in the class. That impact is about half what it is for the things that you actively debunk in the class. But we do have some evidence that students can take the refutation of this one idea and use it to effectively refute things that you didn't even talk about. So we have some pretty good evidence that we think this model works. In 2001, Lilienfeld and a couple of his colleagues wrote about essentially how to teach a class like this. It was in a teaching of psychology journal. He essentially made a case for it in the way that I am now. He's not using the same words because I'm referring to more recent scholarship. But he said basically, we need to have pseudoscience specifically in the psychology classroom. We need to be refuting stuff in the classroom. He provided kind of a sample syllabus. It looks like the first few weeks are about the logical fallacies, the cognitive biases. So he might have done very much what Nat just did this morning for us. And then you can see he lists topics that he thinks are related to psychology. And he's sort of suggested, if you don't know where to start, here are some good places to start. He concludes his paper by saying, the next step is we have to find out if this stuff works. He says, I think it should, but let's find out if it works. So we were sitting around the table 3 years ago, and we said, wow, we sort of answered his call. Let's see if this stuff works, and it turns out it does. It works. We have robust evidence. So we wanted to sort of update his paper. Are there people teaching in the way that he recommended? And if so, kind of how is it going? How is it going? Where do things stand now? And so that's what our paper is like. We also hope that it will serve as a guide for people who want to create such classes, but maybe are not lucky enough to be in the room with a bunch of like-minded scholars. And we shouldn't all be individually reinventing the wheel about this. So essentially, everyone in Lilienfeld was invited to share the syllabus of the course they were teaching. We know people, so this is all just purposive sampling. We just reached out to people. I combed the literature, and whenever I found a scientific paper that reported anything like any of this, I reached out to the authors and said, hey, I'm reviewing syllabi, and will you send me yours? And some people have posted them online, and I found maybe 70 or 80 or something. In the end, I had to narrow it down to 58 course syllabi. I excluded things prior to 2001 because I thought, let's just do this post Lilienfeld's 2001 paper. I narrowed it to undergrad classes just because I needed some standardization. I just needed some standardization so we weren't talking total apples and oranges. We collected a few from that were not in English and sort of Nat helped with some translations. But I discovered, one of my discoveries is that within the CSU, our syllabi are very, very standardized. A little less true in non-CSU institutions and quite a bit less true outside of the United States. And so I had to exclude some syllabi because I simply couldn't find the information in them that there are different standards for what should go into a syllabus. So I think here is my picture. It's still pretty broad picture, United States and Canada exclusively, but I have public institutions, private institutions. Within the United States, you can see from almost everywhere, basically. And this is really reassuring to me. People are teaching critical thinking specifically using a refutational approach kind of everywhere. Except please realize in the United States, there are approximately, let me think what the number is exactly, about 4,000 bachelor's degree granting institutions. And 56 of them, are offering critical thinking classes that I know of. So they're everywhere in a sense, but they're still pretty rare simultaneously. Who is teaching them? Where are these classes in terms of what departments? More in psychology than anywhere else. You can see psychology, philosophy, past that, anthropology, but then the other kind of categories that are really quite large are these first-year experience classes and general education. And I was frankly surprised how many of them are offered. And I know that Ray's is like that. I suspect Rod's is sort of a GE, or is it specifically for psychology?
Psychology, it's a 400-level psychology.
Specifically for psych, yeah. A lot of them, though, what's happening is there will be a faculty member at an institution for whom this is their passion. And when they get an opportunity, typically they're at senior status, they have a lot of kind of institutional power. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And they are given an opportunity to create a brand new class. What would you like to do? They do this. And they do it in whatever venue works for them. I think Chip taught in an honors program, right? A lot of these were honors. So they fit it into something where they have an opportunity to do that. And they love it. I mean, when I emailed people to ask, is it okay if I use your syllabus in this review? I had long email exchanges with people saying, this was the most important class I ever taught in my career. Like, this is the one. This mattered. People were so passionate about this class. Often there was a sadness tinged with that because sometimes I would find a syllabus online from 2010 or 2015 and I'd say, hey, I saw your syllabus, can I use it in my study? And are you still teaching? What's the update? And often the story was, well, I became dean, I had to leave the classroom, I retired, I had to leave the classroom. Is anyone teaching the class now? No, it's so heartbreaking. All that work, it was the most important class, but it's not being taught anymore. So I heard that a lot. But I think that's what's happening here. A couple other observations. The first thing that you notice when you look at these syllabi is that they are quirky. This is the cover page of one syllabus to show you what I mean. They are covered in clip art, and I'll show you some other examples. But boy, people, this is clearly their life's passion, you know? And one of them had a long tribute to the instructor's mother with a picture of her with a description that my mom taught me so much about how to think, how to approach the world. This class represents values I learned in my family. Many of them had 2 or 3 or 4 pages of the rationale for why this class is being offered. Instead of just in the CSU, you get a 1-paragraph course description, and that's our standard, but then the people teaching these classes add a lot of material. This was a cover page for another course. You can just see how much effort folks were putting into really making a case for this class to the students. One of them had skeptics and quotes from them sort of inserted throughout the syllabus. I think there were 7 or 8 quotes scattered throughout this syllabus. Some of them were covered in comics like this one. I know that's really hard to read, but it appears to be an archaeologist. Did you ever have a day when you wished you were a creationist? And then over here you have the unmasking of Bigfoot, and it turns out it's really Elvis and an alien, and somebody says, I knew this Bigfoot thing would turn out to be a scam. Lots of clip art scattered throughout them. So what I'm taking from this is that this is super idiosyncratic, and these really are reflecting people's kind of life mission. This is the work that we do for the love of it. This is different from some other classes. It's different. Okay, what are the classes called? I'll show you. There are a few, 5 of them that are used more than once. Please notice critical thinking was used twice. But that's really the only time the words critical thinking showed up in these classes. So they are designed to meet institutionalized critical thinking requirements, but by and large, we are not calling these classes critical thinking. The most common name was science and pseudoscience. Now, everything else I'll fill in was only used once, but I hope it kind of overwhelms you with just the variety of class names. I mean, it's kind of incredible. It's kind of incredible. By the way, I also excluded courses that were super specific to one particular either discipline or topic. And so these are just the general. Oh, yes, sorry. Well, yours was a grad class.
Yeah.
I also,
And it was policy.
and it was policy. I also excluded my own class because it's primarily a methods class, and the first third or so is about critical thinking, but it's primarily a methods class. So I excluded a lot of great classes. I did include Ray's and Rod's and Chip's. And Anthony's, I think, yes. So anyway, what are we calling ourselves? We don't know yet. Here is kind of you can see science and pseudoscience are used in a lot of class names. Weird seems to be a sort of a key word that we are honing in on a little bit. Usually those correspond with using Schick and Vaughn or Michael Shermer's texts, because they have the weird word, the word weird in the title. But please notice, we have not landed on this yet. What is the word that signifies, even amongst ourselves, oh, that's the person doing the same thing I'm doing? Well, the word pseudoscience might be the thing that would clue you in, but not all of us are even in the sciences. There is a pseudo-history class in this sample, and there are a couple of pseudo-archaeology classes, but I'm not sure the term pseudo can be applied in all disciplines, but it is widely used. Oh, you can see the bullshit class, that's yours, yeah. Yes, yes. What are the objectives? I mean, I sometimes they were hard to discern exactly what the objectives is, so this isn't a terribly systematic analysis, because remember those 4 pages for some people? I had to sort of go through there and pull out, can I identify a sentence that says the goal of the class is, and so this is really just a rough kind of what people are going for. But it was interesting to me that the most common objectives were to teach how science works and to distinguish science from pseudoscience, and those were on there. A little less often you saw teaching critical thinking or teaching evidence-based decision-making. A lot of people said they were going to be identifying biases and logical fallacies as part of. So all the things we've been talking about here, and Dr. Gusso, I so appreciated what you said yesterday, because I'm finding the same thing. We don't know what to call this, but there's some definite overlap in what kinds of things are happening in refutational classes. So the readings are also interesting in the same way that course names are. These are the books that are used in more than one. And readings were super interesting to analyze because some people listed 8 or 9 or 10 books in a lower division GE class, and I suspect they're not having the entire book on the reading list. I know Dr. Hall, for instance, I know has selected chapters out of each one, and that's why there's 10 books on the list. I think about a third of the classes did not use books. They used journal articles or compiled readings that I didn't even have access to, so I don't really know what they're offering. But these are the ones that are used, and please notice, number one, these are books often that have been around a long time. Tom Gilovich's book was published in the 80s, I can't remember what year, but that book is on, and Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan. Those are on Lilienfeld's list from 2001, because he recommended reading. And you see The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. You see Michael Shermer pops up a few times, Schickenborn. There's another Scott Lilienfeld there, The Science and Pseudoscience of Clinical Psych. But then these are the books that are used by somebody, but not everybody, and I mean not even more than one. And you can just see it's a really diverse list. I tried to distinguish like kind of true textbooks from trade, and that's way harder to do than you think it's going to be. Way harder to do than you think it's going to be. For the psychologists in the room, I've used the Stanovich there, How to Think Straight About Psychology. Is it a textbook? Is it technically a textbook? I don't know if you technically, I know the Jason book, the critical thinking book down there on the bottom row, he considers that a textbook, and he provides Canvas modules and exams and stuff. So a few of them are clearly textbooks, but most of them are in some weird, ambiguous, in-between land. Once again, this tells me that the teaching of these classes is highly idiosyncratic. People are individually identifying the things that they are excited about. That we don't have any standardization. And I'm not here to say we need standardization. Maybe the greatest thing about these classes is that they are so idiosyncratic. They're taught by people who are true experts, who are incredibly passionate. But there's no shortage of resources, I guess. No shortage of resources. What topics are being taught? I decided to use the factor analysis that Ray reported about yesterday just to see if I could categorize, because I had all these syllabi, so I wrote down for each class what topics are showing up on their syllabus. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just put them in these categories and see what happens. So this is what happened. 70–80% have something to do with the paranormal or extraordinary life forms, and they're all including those. So those are pretty standard. The religious items, and we were talking about them a little bit yesterday, I think, Scott, right? Or maybe it wasn't you, but how do we teach about religious topics? What are the religious topics? And the effectiveness of prayer is one of them. Near-death experiences, yeah. Actually, let me go back here to remind myself. Creationism got lumped there in our factor analysis. Intelligent design, prayer for healing, near-death experiences, demonic possession, exorcism, and cults. So those are also pretty popular. Interestingly to me, the one that gets the least love is ghosts. I don't know what to say, like that's wild. At Fresno State, we have a very large population of Hmong who are, what is the word I'm looking for? It's an animistic religion. And so when we survey Fresno State students, we get very, very, very high endorsement on ghost-related items because of animism. What it makes me think of is that each population probably has certain things like that you either might want to go in hard on or you might want to avoid for whatever reason. And so each population probably kind of calls for a different profile. I don't know. More likely, the instructor themselves probably has the profile of things they know a lot about and are super interested. I mean, the list, all right, so those are the ones I could categorize. The next slide are all the things that I couldn't even categorize. And that's a long list, you know? That's a long list. I am currently prepping a critical thinking class in human development and family science for the fall. I've already got things on my syllabus that aren't even on this list. Yeah, this is wild. I did look up all of these to make sure I knew what they were, but I can't promise. But I can kind of see why some of these I could teach, but some of these I couldn't teach, and probably everyone teaching a class like this has your profile. There is no shortage of books, and there's no shortage of material for us to be addressing in these classes. All right, really briefly before I talk about what I think all that means, and I'd love to hear from any of you about what this means for kind of for our movement. Obviously, this is severely limited geographically in what I had access to because of language and such. Also, purpose of sampling, I don't know what I missed. No way of knowing what I missed. I hope some of you will maybe send me your syllabi so we can kind of keep it going. And of course, a syllabus is not always an accurate representation of what happens in the class. I strongly suspect that these are, because they were so lovingly crafted, you know, so I think they probably are, but we don't know. So take this for what it's worth. It's just like dipping our toe in and seeing what is out there. But here are some of my thoughts about it. The coursework is widespread, it's all over, but it's not common in terms of density. I was disheartened at how many people said, I loved teaching it, but it disappeared when I left that university. So these courses are sort of ephemeral. You know, they pop into existence, and they're probably fabulous while they're here, and then they go away. Yeah, it's just not institutionalized, and I think maybe we should talk about that. Psychology has emerged very strongly as the core of this work. Critical thinking, when the CSU passed the requirement, they envisioned this was all about philosophy. And philosophers teach a lot of critical thinking classes, or did. But boy, that's not true anymore. This has shifted to psychology. And we heard some great reasons yesterday from Dr. Gilovich about why that might be. But psychology is definitely the core. A lot of people are teaching these in cross-disciplinary courses. Lilienfeld recommended that critical thinking classes like this should be clearly, solidly embedded in a discipline, because he said you want your examples to be super highly relevant to people so they can clearly see, I'm going to need these skills in my profession. And that's not really what we're doing. Just saying, it's not what we're doing. So I don't know if he was right or wrong about the recommendation, but we're not following it. We haven't landed on a name for ourselves. Maybe because it's still wide open, there's room for this group of people to talk about what our name should be and make it happen. Maybe that should happen here. Maybe an advantage is having all of this. It's almost like we've infiltrated so many cracks. You know what I mean? We're everywhere, and maybe we just want to leave it like that. I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Something that I didn't mention yet, but forget the numbers exactly. Maybe 80% of the instructors appear by their name, and I know that's fallible, but as a rule of thumb, it's not a bad way to go, appear to be men. There are not very many women teaching these classes, so what is that about? The only thing we kind of came up with collectively is if you're not teaching this class until you're a full professor towards the end of your career in a very privileged position, women are less likely at every level of academia to be promoted to the next level. And so maybe this is kind of an effect of whatever barriers are keeping women from being promoted, and maybe keeping them in lecturer positions rather than professor positions, and then you're never really going to be in a position where you can create, you know, an idiosyncratic class for yourself. But I don't know, maybe I think that's something we should be talking about, why so many men and so few women. Many, 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 many books and many, many topics. The Lilienfeld Alliance is so kind of low tech, but we have a shared Google Drive, and if you don't have access to it, but you'd want access, just shoot me an email, let me know, because we share our syllabi, we share videos that we use in classes. I think there's a folder that has learning activities, and we just need to get people to kind of keep sharing their stuff so that other people sort of don't have to reinvent their entire class. Even if they couldn't travel to Edmonton, they can still get access to some of those things online. But I really think we need to talk about how to institutionalize refutation specifically as the approach for teaching critical thinking. This is the one that works. Pretty clear evidence that other strategies for critical thinking are much less effective. And so I think we should be talking about how to institutionalize it. And I would love for this organization to lead the way here. As Dr. Gilovich said yesterday, we don't know what a higher ed is going to look like in 5 years, but we know it's going to be different from it is now. And so this is the moment. Remember, he sort of gave this piece of wisdom that now is literally the moment. And so here we are, and I hope for later in the day, I know I need to get off the stage, but I hope that we can have some discussions about these issues. How can we institutionalize this? How can we strengthen ourselves so that what we think is working and we have evidence is working can be shared with our colleagues, so the difficulty of creating a new class the bar isn't quite so high, because people are really doing a lot of work to make these classes happen totally from scratch, and maybe we need to work on institutionalizing it. I hope to talk to all of you about these things, but thank you.